They seated me by the patio heater close enough to hear the laughter from inside, but far enough to know I wasn't meant to be part of it. A white linen napkin rested stiffly on my lap. The patio table wobbled slightly with every breeze that slipped under the heater's orange glow. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the country club, I saw them, my family gathered around a long candle-lit table, crystal glasses, clinking warm lights softening their expressions. Dad sat at the center, of course, Richard Carter in his navy blazer and gold cufflinks commanding attention like always. To his right, Brian leaned in with that signature half-smirk of his likely mid-anecdote about real estate profits. And on his other side, Vanessa gestured grandly with a manicured hand, her voice surely rising above the others, with just enough charm to still be called elegance. No one had looked toward the patio. "We figured you'd prefer a quieter spot," Mom had said earlier, touching her pearl necklace like it grounded her. "You know how Brian gets when he starts talking shop. Didn't want you to feel out of place." Out of place. As if that decision hadn't already been made the moment I walked in and no one stood to greet me. As if I hadn't noticed my name missing from the place cards around the main table. I'd arrived right on time. Not early, not fashionably late, just on time. And yet the valet had seemed confused by my name, and the hostess had checked twice before pointing out politely, "You're with the Carter Group. I believe they've reserved a table just outside Miss." Of course, I had murmured, pulling my coat tighter around me. From the patio, I could hear snippets of conversation drift through the glass. To Dad, 70 and still sharp as ever, Brian's voice carried with ease. There was a swell of agreement, then the clink of a toast. I raised my water glass slightly toward no one and took a sip. Inside, the server poured red wine into Vanessa's glass. She laughed, brushing something off Brian's jacket, her red dress gleaming under the chandelier. I adjusted my scarf and smiled politely at the empty chair across from me. A waiter brought my plate out, not the filet mignon I remembered requesting on the RSVP, but a cold spinach salad, likely an afterthought. "Kitchen's backed up," he said without meeting my eyes. I nodded. "Thanks." I took one bite. The dressing was too bitter. A breeze slipped through the patio curtain and caught the corner of the cloth napkin. I pinned it down with my fingers, holding it still. My nails had chipped one of those details I would have noticed instantly on Vanessa. She always noticed small things, especially when they were slightly off. Through the window, she leaned toward Brian again, her laughter a ribbon I could hear but not join. A toast was made again. I caught the glint of a camera flash the curve of a birthday cake being wheeled in. A server placed it in front of Dad. Everyone stood. I stayed seated. No one turned toward the patio. No one gestured me in. Not even a glance. A year ago, I would have still tried. I would have knocked gently on the glass, waved awkwardly, maybe even mouthed, "Hi, Dad." But I'd stopped doing that. Somewhere along the line, you learn not to ask for a seat that was never meant for you. From the corner of my eye, I saw a couple on the next patio table staring, whispering behind their hands. I wasn't sure if they were whispering about me or if I just felt exposed enough to believe they were. I adjusted the hem of my coat and checked the time. Still early? They hadn't even reached the speeches yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope, cream-colored thick, with "To Dad," written in my neat handwriting. I had meant to give it to him before dinner. A simple note. No grand message. Just a line or two, "Happy 70th. I'm proud to be your daughter, no matter what that has meant to everyone else." But it stayed in my lap. I wasn't going to interrupt the performance inside. The server returned awkward and too apologetic. "Would you like anything else I can see about getting the entree?" "I think I'm good," I said, folding the napkin and setting it gently over the untouched salad. The door behind him opened briefly, and I heard Vanessa's voice loud and laughing. "Oh no, Evelyn's out there. I thought she had other plans." There was a pause, then more laughter. Someone said something I couldn't hear, but the tone was clear, light, dismissive. I didn't flinch, not outwardly. Instead, I picked up my clutch, placed the envelope inside again, and zipped it shut. From my seat, I watched Dad blow out the candles. Vanessa leaned in to kiss his cheek. Brian patted his shoulder. A second flash went off. Someone else poured champagne. I imagined walking in. I imagined stepping through that door and watching the silence drop. But then what they would smile too wide, shift uncomfortably, maybe make a joke to cover the air. The same dance again. No, not tonight. I placed both hands on the table, steady and still, and let the silence settle over me. The kind that doesn't ask to be filled, the kind that begins as pain and then becomes power. A tap on glass made me look up. Not from inside, from the valet station out front. The young man in a dark blazer gave me a slight nod, barely noticeable, then tapped his earpiece and spoke into it. A moment later I heard it. A low hum, deep and rhythmic, growing louder as it approached. Conversation inside hadn't faltered. They didn't hear it yet. Not over the music and the clinking glasses. I stood, not rushed, not hesitant. I took one final look through the window. Dad's face was lit by candlelight eyes soft with nostalgia. He looked happy, or maybe just practiced. He'd always been good at smiling for the room. I turned and walked toward the railing. The helicopter appeared over the ridge, a sleek matte black body moving with slow precision slicing through the twilight sky. The sound wasn't aggressive, just steady, deliberate, like a drumbeat no one could ignore once it started. Chairs scraped inside. The laughter stopped. I didn't turn to look. The aircraft descended toward the clearing adjacent to the restaurant's lawn where private arrivals sometimes landed for high-profile guests. My ride. Not arranged as a statement, just practical. I had another event to attend. Somewhere I was expected. Somewhere I mattered. The wind kicked up as it hovered. My coat lifted slightly at the hem. I held it down with one hand, the other resting on the railing. Then from behind me I heard it. "Is that for her?" A whisper sharp with disbelief. Another voice, Vanessa's, said something clipped, but the wind took it away before it reached me. I didn't wait to hear more. The valet opened the side gate with practiced formality. "Miss Carter," he said with that tone reserved for those whose names he'd been instructed not to forget. I nodded once, stepped through, and crossed the lawn. No fanfare, no speeches, just my heels against the stone, the thrum of the rotor, and the moment stretching like string between two worlds. The door to the chopper opened. I climbed in, settled into the seat, and fastened the belt. From the air, the restaurant looked like a dollhouse, perfect closed, sealed off. I could still see the table, the lanterns, the patio where I'd sat alone. But I wasn't down there anymore, and maybe no one waved. But they saw. They all saw. I arrived exactly on time, not early, not late. The kind of timing that leaves no room for complaint, no opportunity for anyone to say, "Oh, we didn't expect you so soon." I knew better now. Arriving early gave them time to shuffle me elsewhere. Arriving late made me look like I didn't care. But on time forced them to acknowledge I existed. Vanessa opened the door. She didn't hug me. "Oh, you made it," she said flatly, stepping aside. No warmth, no eye contact, just that overly casual tone people use when they're hoping you'll read between the lines and leave. I walked in anyway. The house still smelled like cinnamon and clove, Dad's favorite. Someone had overdone it with the potpourri. The living room was filled with laughter, a few bursts of applause, clinking glasses. Eli was telling a story again, probably the one about the fishing trip where he fell in but claimed it was to rescue the bait. I stood at the edge of the hallway for a moment. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just kept talking. I found Mom near the kitchen arranging pastries with surgical precision. Her hands didn't pause when she saw me. "Evelyn," she said without turning, "could you help with the napkins?" That was it. No hello. No, you look nice. Just napkins. I folded them in silence one by one. White linen, embroidered corners. I remembered ironing them with her when I was younger, when she still corrected my folds with a soft try again. Now she didn't even glance up. "They're seated on the deck," she added. "You'll be outside." Outside. The word landed softly, but it settled deep. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. This wasn't the moment. Not here, not yet. I took the tray of napkins and walked toward the sliding doors. As I stepped out, I heard someone behind me ask, "Why isn't she just sitting with us in here?" Vanessa's voice answered quickly, "It's quieter out there. She prefers that." A lie, said smoothly, like it had been rehearsed. The deck was beautifully set, small string lights, place settings, even a heater near the railing. But there was only one chair. One, not two, not four, just one. A table for one. Like a guest who'd RSVP'd late, or a stranger who didn't quite belong but was being humored. I sat down. From here, I could see the entire room through the windows. The warm lighting, the laughter, the toasts. Brittany was front and center, gesturing grandly, making everyone laugh. She'd always had that easy charisma, the kind that masked cruelty as charm. She caught my eye once, didn't smile, didn't look away either, just let the moment hang like she was daring me to react. I didn't. I adjusted my napkin, poured myself a drink, and looked past her. That was the game, wasn't it? They gave me a place, a seat, a plate. But not inclusion. It was all surface. And somehow that made the exclusion worse. Like they'd gone through the motions just enough to say, "You're overreacting," if I ever dared to speak. But I wouldn't speak. Not yet. My fork clinked gently against the porcelain as I picked at the salad Mom had plated. Arugula, shaved almonds, a citrus vinaigrette, her usual ladies' lunch mix. I used to love this salad. Today it tasted like performance, like effort made not for me but for the appearance of inclusion. From inside, applause erupted. Dad had entered the room. I heard Brittany say something loudly. Then the chorus of "Happy Birthday" began. I sat still, alone. No one opened the sliding door to invite me in. No one even looked back. A part of me wanted to laugh. They'd managed to seat me so close technically there, but somehow entirely removed, like I was in a soundproof box. Then the door opened. It was Nina. She looked surprised to see me seated out here. "Eve," she said, using the nickname no one else used anymore, "why are you—" I shook my head. She paused. Her eyes moved over the single chair, the untouched wine glass beside mine that no one would use. She didn't ask again. "I brought you this," she said, handing me a small plate with one of the lemon bars from the tray inside. "Mom still adds too much zest." I smiled genuinely for the first time that afternoon. "You could come inside," she offered quietly. I looked through the glass. Brittany had taken my seat at the main table Dad's left. That used to be mine growing up, the responsible daughter seat. Apparently she'd inherited that title too. "I'm fine here," I said. She didn't push. "I'll sit a bit," she said instead, pulling over one of the unused folding chairs and settling beside me. I let the silence sit. It wasn't uncomfortable. Not with her. From the corner of my eye, I saw Vanessa peek out through the curtain. She registered Nina's presence next to me, frowned slightly, then disappeared. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Evelyn, Mom called out, "Would you mind bringing the second cake out, the one in the fridge?" I stood, handed my plate to Nina. "I'll be back," I said. Inside, the temperature was warmer. The air smelled sweeter. Someone had lit the candles already. I moved to the kitchen, pulled the fridge door open. The cake sat neatly on the second shelf, chocolate ganache, Dad's favorite. As I lifted it out, I noticed a handwritten note taped to the inside door. "Britt, serve this one." Not Evelyn, not even Vanessa. Just a quiet label. As if I wouldn't be the one holding it. I hesitated. Then I closed the fridge with the cake in hand and turned. Brittany was standing right there, arms crossed. "I'll take that," she said, reaching for it. I held it tighter. "I've got it," I said evenly. Her lips curled upward, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sure," she said. "Wouldn't want anyone to say you weren't helpful." The implication landed harder than I expected. I said nothing. She stepped aside, gesturing toward the deck. As I passed her, she added under her breath, "Try not to trip." I stepped back onto the deck with the cake in hand, careful not to move too quickly. The sun had shifted, casting a long shadow across the table. Brittany returned to her seat with theatrical grace, the same spot beside Dad, her arm casually looped around the back of his chair like a permanent fixture. When I placed the cake on the table, no one clapped. They didn't even look up. Except for Dad. His eyes caught mine for half a second. That used to mean something. Now it was just a glance, obligatory, brief, easily forgotten. "Thank you," Mom said, in a voice just loud enough to be heard, but not directed at me, more like a note in the background of the scene she was curating. I moved to sit back down with Nina, but my chair was gone, folded, stacked with the others near the garden wall. I stood for a moment unsure. Then, without a word, I walked toward the edge of the lawn and sat on the low stone ledge near the flower beds. From there, I could still hear the conversation, Vanessa gossiping about her client Brittany, offering to host next year's party since things seemed to fall into place better that way. And Mom agreeing? Of course. Every moment felt like a small push toward the edge. None of it loud, none of it dramatic, just steady pressure as if I were being moved out of the frame inch by inch. Nina brought me a cup of sparkling water. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," she whispered. "I know I said taking the glass. That's the part that stings less. At least it's honest now." She nodded. Silence again. But this time it pressed differently. Not like a weight, but like a decision forming in the quiet. The kind of silence that comes right before a shift. I noticed Brittany leaning into Dad's ear, whispering something that made him laugh. He looked so relaxed next to her, like he'd found a version of family that didn't ask questions, didn't remember. A breeze moved across the lawn. Someone lit the second set of candles. The scent of vanilla frosting filled the air. And I realized I hadn't even been offered a piece of the first cake. It wasn't until the laughter hit a strange octave, too synchronized, too hollow, that I knew something was being performed. Brittany stood again. "I just want to say a few words," she said, tapping her fork against her glass. "About Dad, of course." People quieted instantly. Even Nina stopped mid-sentence. I stayed seated on the stone ledge slightly behind the crowd, but still within earshot. Brittany spoke about memories, about how Dad taught her to drive, how he'd guided her through her first job, how he always showed up even when others didn't. I felt that last line like a pin through fabric. It didn't matter if it was aimed at me directly or just convenient collateral. Either way, it stung. She turned smiling wide, and that's why this birthday I wanted to do something special. She gestured toward the gift table. I got him that leather-bound travel journal set he always talks about. And her eyes flicked toward Mom. We arranged a trip. For just him and us. A little father-daughter getaway. The applause was louder than before. Vanessa clapped like she was at a concert. Mom dabbed at her eyes. Dad stood hugged. Brittany said something that made everyone laugh again. I watched from my spot on the ledge, my hands resting on my knees, unmoving. Nina leaned closer. "Did you know about the trip?" I shook my head. "First I've heard. They didn't invite you?" "No." She exhaled sharply, but said nothing more. I thought about the time I took off work for last year's birthday trip, only to find out it had been canceled. Apparently something came up. Now I knew what came up, a better version of the guest list. The trip hadn't been canceled. I had. Brittany returned to her seat, glowing. A silence followed, momentary, almost delicate, before Vanessa broke it with a joke about the airport lounge. Laughter resumed. I stood up slowly, brushing off the back of my dress. I didn't walk toward the table. I didn't say a word. Instead, I walked toward the garden path, past the lanterns and the citronella candles, to the far edge of the lawn. I needed to breathe where the air hadn't been filtered by curated smiles and carefully framed stories. There, under the old oak tree, I could still see everything, but they couldn't see me. And from that distance, I noticed something. The framed photo on the table near the cake. A collage. Dad and Brittany at the beach. Brittany and Mom at the opera, even a photo from last year's Thanksgiving. Not a single image of me. Not one. I lingered beneath the oak tree, pretending to inspect the ivy trailing down the fence, but really I was just buying time. Time to press the weight of the moment down into silence so it wouldn't leak into my voice, my eyes, or my hands. They didn't look for me, not once. Eventually, I drifted toward the dessert table, not because I was hungry, but because that's where no one else was. A few leftover plates sat beside a tiered tray of lemon bars, the kind I used to bake with Dad when I was a teenager. I reached for one, paused, and then pulled my hand back. It didn't taste the same anymore. Then I heard it, my name, soft, quick. I turned. Aunt Lorraine was standing a few feet away, holding a plastic fork and paper plate. "I didn't see you earlier," she said. I nodded. She looked around, then leaned in slightly. "That trip, they said you couldn't come because of work, that you were too busy." I blinked. "Is that what they told everyone?" She hesitated. I just assumed. My voice barely made it past my throat. I was never told about it. Her mouth parted slightly as if to speak, but then she just nodded, placed a lemon bar on her plate, and walked away. I didn't follow. I didn't need the apology. I needed the absence to speak for itself. Later, when the candles were lit and the music shifted to something slower, something that made people soften, I stood at the edge of the patio, my shadow folding into the lawn. Brittany had taken center stage again, this time passing out champagne flutes. "Let's toast to Dad," she said, lifting her glass. "To the man who's always made us feel like we mattered." I didn't raise a glass. I didn't even have one. But I watched. And I watched closely. Dad said a few words, gracious, as always. Then Mom stepped forward with her own speech, recalling the night she and Dad met, how he'd stood in the rain to wait for her outside the theater. People swooned. I remained still, detached, not cold, just steady. Someone bumped into me from behind. It was Tyler, Brittany's husband. "Oh," he said, "didn't see you there." "That's all right." He looked at the crowd, then back at me. "You not joining." "Not tonight." "Your seat's still there, you know." I gave a soft smile. "I know." He waited a second too long before walking away. It was the kind of pause that only happens when someone starts to realize they've missed something. And yet nothing was said. No one asked why I wasn't part of the toast. No one asked why I hadn't spoken. That was the point. Because they'd convinced themselves the silence meant agreement. They didn't understand it meant observation. It meant memory. I stepped away from the crowd and found myself on the side path that led behind the house stone pavers barely lit by the garden lights. I used to love this path as a kid. It always felt like a secret trail, especially in the evenings when the fireflies came out. Now it felt like an escape route. From around the corner I heard laughter. Not cruel, but loud, too loud. The kind that fills space so nothing else can breathe. Then I heard my name again. Not said to me, said about me. She always takes things too personally, Brittany's voice unmistakable. You know how she is, someone else replied. So sensitive, so dramatic. A third chuckled. Didn't she used to want to fly helicopters or something? What happened to that? I froze. It was like standing on glass and hearing the first crack. They didn't know I was there. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I knew they meant for someone to hear it. Maybe not me specifically, but someone. Anyone. Because ridicule thrives when it feels safe from confrontation. I didn't move, I didn't make a sound. Eventually their voices faded and I was left in the quiet, the kind of quiet that roars in your ears. I walked back inside, rejoining the edge of the celebration. The patio was fuller now. String lights cast a warm glow across the backyard, and music drifted out from the speakers in soft waves. People danced, people drank, people forgot. I didn't. From across the yard, I locked eyes with Chelsea, an old colleague from my aviation project days. She smiled, but there was something in her expression, hesitation maybe, that made me walk toward her. You came, I said softly. She nodded. Brittany invited me last minute, said it'd be nice to have more people from your old work life around. Ah, she didn't know, did she? Chelsea asked. I raised a brow. That you still fly. That you actually started your own firm. That contract with Westbridge, wasn't that yours? I gave a small shrug. It didn't come up. Chelsea's eyes narrowed just slightly, a glint of something behind them. It should have. And with that, she pressed something into my hand, a tiny metal pin. A rotor wing emblem. From the team, she said. They said you'd know what it meant. I closed my fingers around it. Tightly. It was the smallest thing. Barely the weight of a paperclip. But in that moment, it grounded me more than any speech or applause ever could. I looked past Chelsea toward the house, the patio, the long table of people who still hadn't noticed I'd left or returned or stood right there. And then I turned slightly, letting the pin catch the patio light. No need to say anything. The acknowledgement had already happened. Just not where they expected it to. I didn't plan to stop by the hangar that morning. It was just supposed to be a quick drive to clear my head past the old lake trail, then back before the others woke up. But when I passed the airfield, the morning sun caught the edge of the rotor blades like they were calling my name. I slowed the car, turned in without thinking. My boots crunched softly on the gravel as I stepped out. The hangar door was cracked open just enough to see the sleek silver frame inside. No one was there, just me and the machine I hadn't touched in months. I ran my fingers along the cool aluminum, dusty, a little forgotten, but still beautiful. The sight stirred something. Not pride exactly, memory of who I was before the invitation stopped, before Evelyn became her in the third person. I climbed up into the cockpit. The controls greeted me like an old friend. Switches, dials, levers, I knew them by feel. The seats still smelled faintly of leather and oil. It was the one place no one interrupted, no one judged. Then I heard it. Footsteps behind me, quick, uncertain. I turned. Chelsea stood by the open hangar door, holding a grocery bag in one hand and her phone in the other. Her mouth opened slightly when she saw me inside. I thought you weren't flying anymore, she said. I shrugged. I'm not. She nodded, glanced toward the chopper, then back to me. It's still yours, right? The question hung there longer than it needed to. Yes, I said, quietly but clear. Chelsea set the bag down. I didn't mean to spy, I just saw your car. I gave her a small smile. You're not spying. There was a pause. She stepped closer, her voice lower now. Everyone's talking about yesterday. Of course they are. They think you just left because the food was bad. I laughed, a short breath through my nose. Let them. Chelsea's brow knit. Don't you care? I looked back at the control panel. The dials were still glowing faintly from the sunlight. I care enough not to explain. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, You know, It wouldn't be the worst thing if you showed up in that tomorrow. I turned my head slightly. At Dad's party, she nodded. You arriving by air would shut everyone up. I didn't answer right away, not because I hadn't thought about it, but because part of me already knew what that would mean. A moment so sharp it would slice through every look Brittany had given me every time Mom said, just let it go, every silent seat I'd been assigned. But it would also mean stepping back into the light. On my own terms. Chelsea broke the silence. He still talks about how proud he was when you flew him that first time. Even after the rest, he never stopped bringing it up. I blinked slowly. I didn't think he remembered. He did. He just stopped saying it out loud. The hangar felt different now. Less dusty, less abandoned, like something was waiting not to be fixed, but to be claimed. I placed both hands on the controls. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I was done asking for permission. I noticed the shift when Aunt Marjorie leaned in and whispered something to Uncle Kevin, who turned just slightly, just enough to avoid meeting my eyes. It was the kind of movement people make when they don't want to seem like they're avoiding you, but very much are. A moment later, Jolene tapped her glass with a fork, silencing the gentle buzz of background chatter. We have a little surprise, she sang, all smiles and poise. As you all know, Dad's always been the rock of this family. So this year we decided to honor him with something special. The waitstaff wheeled out a large canvas covered in a white sheet. Jolene pulled it away with a dramatic flair. It was a painted family portrait, soft colors, summer tones. Everyone was there, everyone except me. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I stared at the image while murmurs rose around me, while Dad beamed with pride, and while Eli reached for his wine glass without saying a word. Even Ava looked down at her lap, unsure of what to say. It wasn't just a forgotten moment, it was deliberate. They had spent time on this. They had chosen photos, reviewed sketches, picked outfits, chosen a frame, and in every step of that process no one remembered me. Or worse, they did and excluded me anyway. Oh, I heard someone mutter near the back, "Where's Milena?" And then it came the response from Jolene, light and quick like a joke tossed over her shoulder. She was probably flying that helicopter of hers, she laughed, raising her glass. Scattered chuckles followed. I smiled. I smiled because if I didn't, something else would rise. Something louder, something messier. Instead, I excused myself. I walked slowly to the bar at the edge of the garden and asked for sparkling water. My heels sunk slightly into the grass and the ice clinked gently against the glass when I took a sip. From here, the party looked like a picture in a magazine string, lights above floral arrangements on each table, laughter rolling gently across the lawn. But it didn't feel like my party. It hadn't for years. Jolene came over about 20 minutes later, alone this time. Her voice was syrupy. "I hope you're not upset about the painting," she said, placing a hand lightly on my forearm. "It wasn't intentional." I looked at her hand, then I looked at her face, and then I said, "You don't have to lie." She blinked, and for a second, just a second, I saw her falter. But only for a second. "Suit yourself," she shrugged. "Some people just always find something to be offended about." And with that, she turned and walked back toward the crowd. I finished my water, feeling the bubbles rise and break against the back of my throat. It was the only thing that felt alive in that moment. Later I watched as the cake came out, 3 tiers gold trim customized topper. Ava helped carry the bottom layer, her cheeks flushed from the heat and the attention. I thought I saw her glance toward me again. But I didn't move. I stood still and let the moment pass because I knew deep down they weren't done yet. And neither was I. The sun began to lower behind the sycamore trees lining the edge of the Carter estate, casting longer shadows across the yard. I stayed near the edge of it, all present but invisible. The soft clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter, they all flowed without interruption, like I was a page someone had skipped in a book they thought they'd already read. Ava found me again this time with her curls pulled back and a cupcake in her hand. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside me watching the party like I was. "I heard what Aunt Jolene said," she murmured after a while. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She acts like it's always been her place to tell your story, but she doesn't know the half of it. I turned to look at my daughter. She wasn't a little girl anymore, and she saw things now. "She doesn't need to," I said quietly. "I know it." Ava nodded. "Still, it's not right." "No, it isn't," I said. "But sometimes being right isn't the point." "What is?" I looked back out at the gathering, knowing when to let silence do the work. That evening, just before the final toast, Dad stood. He tapped his glass with a spoon, smiling in the familiar way he always had, warm, a little unsure, but full of pride. "I want to thank everyone for making this day so special," he began. "It means the world to me to have family all around." My stomach tightened. "Family is everything," he continued. "Through the hard years and the good, through transitions." He paused. "And I'm grateful for every one of you who stood by me." He didn't look at me, not once. But I watched his hands steady, aged, but confident. I knew those hands. I'd held them when I was a child. I'd watched them build fix, scold comfort. Now they clutched the stem of his wine glass like it was an anchor in a room where the tide had turned. When the toast ended, people rose to clap. Jolene wiped away a tear with the back of her finger. Eli reached for his phone. And me, I remained seated. It wasn't out of protest. I simply didn't feel the need. Let them clap. Let them toast. I had already learned what applause sounded like when it didn't include you. Later, I walked past the kitchen to retrieve my coat. The staff was finishing up their laughter, quieter, casual, real. One of them, a woman maybe in her 20s, looked up and said, "They told me to leave the slice of cake for you in the fridge, Ms. Carter." The helicopter one. She smiled, warm and unaware. "Thank you," I said softly. I stepped out onto the back veranda, cool air brushing against my skin. That's when I saw it. The flight team, early by 10 minutes, had landed the chopper just behind the main barn. Its blades were slowing the light on its nose, blinking steady and low. I heard the pilot step out, radio in hand, scanning for me. But more than that, I saw how the heads turned. One by one, people at the tables turned in their seats. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to draw a hush. Enough to interrupt dessert. Enough for Jolene to look up her fork, frozen midair. Ava reached my side before anyone else did. She looked up at me with wide eyes, and for a moment she looked like she was trying to decide whether to run or stay. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. "This is how I leave now," I said. And then, without raising my voice, without needing to explain anything more, I began to walk. I didn't sleep much after the party. The chopper had landed clean smooth as always. The pilot, Kevin, greeted me with a quiet, "Good evening, ma'am," and I responded with a nod. Ava sat beside me on the short flight out, still quiet from the day. Her silence wasn't sullen, it was something sharper, observant. We stayed the night in the guest wing of the Fairmont, the one my firm had a long-standing partnership with. It wasn't extravagant, it was familiar, comfortable, and more than anything, it was mine. I didn't need anyone to open the door for me there. The next morning, I sat with coffee in the suite's sunroom, my laptop open, a single file blinking on the screen. The Carter Estate zoning and ownership update. Ava padded in barefoot. "You're working." "Just preparing something," I said. "Is it about them?" I looked at her for a moment. "It's about me." Later that afternoon, we returned. Not to the party, but to the house. I'd asked Kevin to drop us off at the private back entrance near the old garden shed no one used anymore. The party cleanup had wrapped. The chairs, lights, empty glasses all cleared away. The silence around the house was louder than it had been yesterday. Mom opened the door when I knocked. Her face was blank for a second, as if her mind had to sort through old drawers to place mine. "Evelyn." "Hi, Mom." She glanced past me to Ava, then back to me. "Is something wrong?" "No," I said. "I just wanted to drop something off for Dad." She hesitated. "He's in the study." I walked in like I used to when I was 17 and forgot my piano book before a recital. Not hurried, not dramatic, just purposeful. Dad was at his desk, sorting through some birthday cards. He looked up when he saw me, tired, expectant, but not surprised. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," he said. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. I set the folder down in front of him. Thin, black, professional. He didn't reach for it. "What's this?" "It's the formal draft of the partnership shift we discussed, the one you said we'd revisit when things settled." He glanced at the folder again. "You're serious about this?" "I always was. You just didn't look at me long enough to notice." Silence fell between us like it always did in the hard moments. But this time it didn't sting. It just cleared the room. "I didn't think you'd want more responsibility," he said finally, "not after how things were left." "I didn't want more responsibility," I said. "I wanted recognition." He opened the folder slowly, thumbing through the first page. "You've updated the estate holdings." "I've been updating them for 3 years." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. Something shifted. I could see it. That slow dawning of comprehension that doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Just a breath. A stillness. Before he could speak, Ava entered. She stood in the doorway holding something in her hand. "What's that, sweetheart?" I asked. "It came for you, at the front desk. A delivery guy dropped it." I took the envelope, handwritten, sealed. Inside was a printed invitation. Inside the envelope was a formal card ivory with gold embossed edges. "By invitation of the Carter Foundation and Coastal Development Group, you are hereby invited to the official ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Carter Conservation Pavilion. Date June 5th. Location Harbor View Public Reserve." Dad froze. He started but didn't finish the sentence. "I filed the final paperwork 2 months ago," I said calmly. "Your name's still on the legacy panel, of course, but I redirected the public recognition to reflect actual development and execution leadership. You named it." I nodded. After Mom's maiden name, I figured she'd appreciate the gesture. He looked toward the doorway where Mom had silently appeared, one hand gripping the frame. "You built this?" she asked. "Planned it. Oversaw the design, secured the permits, and brokered the conservation partnership." Her voice was thin, but we never heard. "I didn't think you were listening." Dad held the invitation again, heavier now than when he first received it. "When is it?" he asked. "Tomorrow," I said. "We kept it small, only 15 people, city officials, press, a few partners, and Ava's school principal. She's been fundraising for the cause." Ava gave a soft smile. "We raised enough for a wildlife viewing deck." The moment held still. Then Dad did something unexpected. He stood up, walked over to the cabinet, opened the drawer, pulled out a bottle of scotch, the one he saved for rare ceremonial occasions. He poured 2 glasses, one for himself, and one he placed quietly in front of me. "Congratulations," he said, voice low. Not proud, not loud, just clear. I didn't lift the glass. Instead, I asked, "Will you be there?" He didn't answer, just looked down at the invitation again, and nodded. Later that evening, I sat with Ava in the guest room looking out over the garden. "Why now?" she asked. "Because the moment finally met the silence." Ava looked confused. I smiled. "You'll understand one day." A knock came at the door. It was Jolene. Her expression was unreadable. "Can we talk?" I gestured toward the chair. She sat. "I didn't know," she said, "about the pavilion, about any of this." "You didn't ask," I replied. She twisted her ring, a nervous habit from childhood. "I'm sorry," she said, "for yesterday, for—" "You don't need to apologize." "I do," she insisted. "You deserved better. We just never saw you like this." I met her eyes. "I've always been like this. I just stopped showing it to people who looked away." Jolene blinked back, something, maybe guilt, maybe surprise. She nodded slowly. "When you arrive tomorrow, you'll make an entrance." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next morning was unusually quiet. Even the birds outside the guest room window seemed to chirp softer, as if they too sensed the air had shifted. I laid out the dark navy jumpsuit, tailored minimalist functional. The kind of thing that didn't beg for attention but couldn't be ignored. Ava helped zip it up. "You look like someone in charge." I said, tucking a pin onto the collar, a small emblem of the Carter Foundation. Subtle, personal. At 9:40, a distant hum began to rise above the trees. It started low, like a tremor under the earth. Within seconds, it was undeniable, the rhythmic chop of helicopter blades. I stepped outside. Dad, Mom, Jolene and a few cousins had gathered near the back porch, shielding their eyes from the morning sun. The aircraft slowly descended into the clearing by the east garden. Its matte gray exterior shimmered in the light. A clean white seal on its door read, "Coastal Urban Response, Founder Access." Ava squeezed my hand. A man in a black windbreaker stepped out first, scanning the area before opening the rear hatch. Then he called out over the noise, "Ma'am Carter, your ride is ready." Jolene's mouth parted slightly. "Wait," she whispered. "Ma'am." Mom turned toward me. "You're the one funding the helicopter." I gave a soft nod. "We use it to reach remote zones in our conservation efforts. Today's ceremony needed a direct route." Dad looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't form the words. The wind picked up. Leaves scattered across the gravel path. I stepped forward, not rushing. Every movement felt intentional. When I reached the edge of the path, I turned back just once. They weren't speaking. They were simply watching. No one reached for their phones. No one smiled. No one blinked too fast. Because for the first time in years, they weren't talking over me. They were listening with their silence. I boarded. Inside the helicopter, Ava settled into the seat beside me, still wide-eyed. "You think they'll come to the pavilion?" I buckled in. They already arrived where it matters. As we lifted off, the house grew smaller beneath us, folding into the trees and the winding road. But the stillness inside me didn't shrink, it expanded. Because this wasn't a statement. It was just a morning. My morning. And the sky belonged to no one but those who dared to rise. The pavilion sat at the edge of the forest where the trees gave way to open sky and the lake caught reflections like secrets whispered too softly to repeat. It was the only place on the Carter estate that didn't feel like it belonged to anyone, and that in itself made it mine. I arrived just after noon. The ribbon cutting was set for 1 p.m., but guests were already trickling in: city officials, program partners, a few quiet faces from the conservation field who knew how much work we'd put in to make this happen. No press, no speeches, just the structure, the lake, and the story etched into the steel plaque at the entrance. In memory of James Carter, built not on land but legacy. Dad had no idea I'd kept the name. Behind the pavilion, I saw him standing by the service path flanked by Mom and Jolene. They hadn't approached yet. They didn't need to. They were watching, not the building, me. I walked the perimeter, slowly checking final touches, wiring for the LED strips embedded in the benches, the quiet hum of the solar filtration system, the moss-covered roof gently absorbing the late summer sun. Ava ran ahead, barefoot, chasing the dragonflies that skimmed the surface of the water. Her laughter echoed unbothered by the weight that had followed us for years. A voice broke the air. "Malina." I turned. Aunt Luann. She hadn't attended a family event in years, said they got too loud, too performative. She stepped forward, her gaze soft but firm. I read the proposal. The Carter Urban Ecology Fund. "It's not just a name." "No," I said quietly, "it's a correction." She nodded, then looked toward the main path. "They're coming." I knew she didn't mean the donors. Within minutes, the rest of the family began appearing, some with hesitation, others pretending they had been part of this all along. I watched as Mom placed a hand on Jolene's shoulder, guiding her toward the front bench. Neither of them smiled. It was the first time they sat in a place where they weren't at the center. As the event began, I stood off to the side. I wasn't introduced. I wasn't applauded. But I was noticed. Because every detail of the pavilion, every steel beam, every recycled tile, every eco-friendly system whispered a truth too loud to ignore. I had done this. Not with anger, not to prove a point, but because it needed to be done. And that made it undeniable. When the ribbon was cut, there was no applause, only silence. A respectful kind, the kind that followed recognition not of a person but of an impact. Ava stood beside me, holding the scissors that had been too large for her little hands. I had let her do it, not to make a statement, but because she understood what this space meant. She had been there the night I typed the first grant request. She had watched me sketch the curved roofline on takeout napkins. She had walked the city with me, collecting signatures one handshake at a time. She knew. That was enough. But then I saw Dad start toward me. His pace wasn't rushed, but it wasn't casual either. He walked with the kind of deliberateness only a man accustomed to being watched could master. Behind him, Mom hesitated. Jolene stayed seated. He stopped just a few feet away, looked at Ava, then at the plaque. His jaw moved, but no words came out. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, folded, paper-worn edges like it had lived there for months. He held it out. I didn't move. So he set it down on the bench between us and turned to leave. I waited until he was gone, then picked it up. It was the original proposal summary, my draft, the one I had mailed out to family the year before, back when I naively thought someone might want to help. He'd scribbled something on the back, just one sentence. "We should have known." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But something shifted, and then Ava, looking up at me with her eyes squinted against the sun, whispered, "Are we going to stay here, Mama?" I crouched beside her, for a little while. Because the truth was, we already had. After most of the guests had gone, I stayed behind. The venue staff moved quietly around me, folding chairs, collecting linens, sweeping away traces of the afternoon. But I lingered, watching the sky shift from gold to blue. Ava had fallen asleep on a nearby bench, her head resting on a folded sweater. And then I heard footsteps, heels on stone. Not rushed, familiar. Jolene. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, gaze sharp. But she didn't speak. For once, she wasn't performing. There was no one left to impress. "I didn't think you'd stay this long," she said eventually, voice low. I turned slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. "Did you think I wouldn't show at all?" She shrugged. "Honestly, I thought you'd fly over, wave your title, and disappear." I didn't answer. because that's what she had expected me to do for years. Be visible only when useful, invisible when inconvenient. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. No logos, no seals, just her name. She blinked. "What's that?" "Application packet," I said. "The women's shelter you used to volunteer at, remember, they're expanding. Looking for program leads. You'd be good." Silence. Then for the first time in years, she looked unsure. "You're giving this to me." "I'm offering it," I said, standing. "What you do with it is yours." She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no apology, no tearful hug, no redemption arc. But as she walked away, envelope in hand, she didn't throw it out. That was enough. Later that night, after Ava was tucked into bed and the dishes had been rinsed, I sat in the kitchen, the same one I'd once been left out of. This time the chair was mine. No one had to offer it. No one had to move over. The seat was there, and I filled it. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need a moment quiet enough for everyone to finally hear them. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay.